Have you ever seen a house move when you weren't looking? What if a mountain held a door, and it opened for you? Would you listen to a drum that sounds once every century? These aren't legends, they're the world's strangest truths. Welcome to Unearthed Secrets. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's begin. The cathedral buried beneath the glacier. Beneath the white silence of the high polar plateau where winds whisper with the breath of ages and the ice groans with secrets too old to name, there lies something not made of frost nor born of snow, something strange, something ancient, something waiting. The locals, what few there are, have legends, old ones, older than maps and older than written word. They speak in hushed tones of the white vault, a cathedral carved not by human hands, but revealed by the shifting of glaciers, seen only once every few generations when the ice briefly relents, but then the storms return, and the glacier swallows its secret again. You wouldn't know it flying over, you'd see only endless whiteness, an expanse of shimmering light and shadow where nothing should grow, and nothing should stand. But somewhere within that frozen quiet, deep beneath the layers of compressed time, something impossible waits. It began, as many such tales do, with a single mistake. A research team had been sent to study climate records embedded in the glacial layers, core samples, they said, data. They were seeking the past to understand the future. But what they found instead was a doorway, not a real doorway, not at first. Just a hint. A shimmer in the deep ice radar returns, a pattern that didn't belong. Perfectly symmetrical hollows too regular to be natural. At first it was dismissed, a glitch, an echo. But the signal persisted, and it sharpened, and then it called to them in its own way. When they drilled, they expected frozen air pockets. They expected perhaps volcanic rock, or trapped gas, or even just a curious anomaly. But what they found was obsidian, not volcanic glass, but something else. Something smooth and cold, harder than steel, and darker than night. A material not found anywhere in that region, or perhaps on Earth at all. They went deeper. The first chamber they reached was circular, not large, not grand, but curved with impossible precision, with a ceiling that resonated with the sound of their own voices. No echoes, just resonance. As if the room was designed not to reflect, but to remember. From there, corridors spread, mapped slowly, methodically, as the ice was melted and siphoned away. And what they uncovered was impossible. Cathedrals, spires, arched halls of silent stone, columns as tall as trees, carved with symbols that flickered at the edge of recognition but defied translation. The deeper they went, the more they realized this place was vast, larger than the great basilicas of Rome, yet entirely underground, entirely buried, and older, far older. Carbon dating was useless. There was no organic matter, no trace of lichen or dust, no evidence of life, yet also no signs of decay. The structures were pristine, untouched by time, as if preserved in amber, frozen in the act of some unknowable ceremony. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Some rooms were warm, unnaturally so, others were so cold, their breath froze in the air in tiny crystals that never fell. Lights flickered where no wires ran, and always, the hum, a low vibration, like the earth itself was breathing beneath their feet, not loud, not constant, but felt through bones, through teeth, through thought. One by one, the researchers began to change. At first, it was small things, dreams of corridors they had not yet explored. Then came the instinctive understanding of the symbols. Even though they had no linguistic key, they said it wasn't language. Not really. It was feeling. It was memory. It was song. One spoke of a chamber with a ceiling of frozen stars, points of light that shimmered as if alive, arranged in constellations no one recognized. Another described a choir, not of voices but of tones, rising and falling with her footsteps. One of them began to draw, intricate sketches of rooms they hadn't reached yet. She didn't know how she knew, but when they followed her drawings, they found those rooms exactly as she'd drawn them. Then came the visions. They saw processions in the halls, figures not quite human, tall and robed, with elongated features and eyes that glowed like frost-lit dawn. These beings moved in solemn silence, carrying orbs of light, pausing beneath vast arches that hummed when they passed. In the dreams, the figures turned and looked, always at the dreamer, never speaking, just watching. One man, a geologist, began carving into his own skin. Symbols, the same as on the walls. He said they helped him understand. He said he could hear the thoughts of the ice. He said the glacier was not just covering the cathedral, it was feeding it, growing it. Another claimed the cathedral was a heart, not metaphorically, literally, that it beat, slowly, over millennia, that it pulsed with the rhythm of forgotten things, that the ice was its blood, and that it was waking up. At night, the surface trembled, not earthquakes, just gentle shifts, murmurs, groans, like the creaking of ancient ships in a frozen harbor. Then came the vanishing. First one researcher, then another, no trace, no blood, no broken equipment, just gone, as if they'd walked into a wall and passed through it. Their tents remained zipped from the inside, their boots still warm, and then the cathedral began to grow. Tunnels they had sealed reopened, walls shifted, new chambers emerged in areas previously mapped as solid. The structure was alive, changing, reacting. The base camp above reported strange auroras overhead, even during midday, lights that swirled and spiraled, always centered over the drill site. Instruments failed. Communications became erratic. The last message received was a whisper, not spoken, not written, just a waveform, transcribed from static. It said, "We remember you." The glacier closed in after that. When a second expedition was sent a year later, there was nothing left. No camp, no tunnel, no disturbance in the snow, just wind, just silence. But those who walk there now, if they stop and listen very carefully, say they can hear it. A hum, a breath, a calling. The legends have grown since then. Some say the cathedral is not a building at all, but a ship, a vessel of stone and memory, crashed or buried or planted there long before the first snow fell. Others believe it is a tomb, holding something that should not wake. And still others say it is a temple, not to gods but to time itself. A place where the past and future meet beneath the ice, and where the present has no meaning. No one knows, but the glacier watches, the wind carries whispers, and the cathedral sleeps, deeper now, darker now, but not gone, never gone. Sometimes, the ice thins, sometimes, strange lights flicker beneath the surface, sometimes, those who camp nearby, return with frostbite on their fingertips and stories they cannot remember. Sometimes, they don't return at all. And in the heart of the frozen world, where no path leads and no map marks, the cathedral waits for the next thaw. It remembers, it listens, and when the time comes, it will open again. The mask that changes faces at dusk. There's a village hidden so deep in the folds of a forgotten northern range that even maps don't bother with its name anymore. Winter there is not a season. It is the default state of being. The snow doesn't fall so much as it waits, endlessly, cloaking every path in memory's absence. And it is within that eternal whiteness, among crooked chimneys and warped timber walls, that a shrine stands, a single room of stillness amid the howl of forgotten winds. This shrine does not ring with bells, nor is it adorned with prayer flags or script. It is plain, unassuming, and silent, but at its heart lies an object that does not belong to the world as we know it. It is called the mask, though even that word feels insufficient. Carved from pale, unknown material, some say bone, some say ivory, others claim it was grown rather than carved. It rests on a pedestal of old stone, smoothed by centuries of breathless reverence. It does not smile, it does not frown, but when dusk falls, and only then, its face begins to change. It was first noticed by a girl too young to be believed, the kind of child whose tales were dismissed with a warm chuckle and a nod. She had sat quietly in the shrine one evening, trying to delay a return to her cold house, and she swore the mask looked at her, not figuratively, but with eyes that blinked and focused. She described its brow furrowing gently, and its lips parting in something like grief. By morning the mask had returned to its placid, closed-eyed calm. Most said it was shadow play. The last light of the sun filtered oddly through the thin reed curtains, or maybe the girl had fallen asleep and dreamt the whole thing. But as days turned into years, others began to witness it. At first, only at the edges of their vision, the hint of motion, a blink, a shift. Eventually, villagers began to visit the shrine at dusk, not out of faith, but out of curiosity and fear. The changes were subtle, but unmistakable. The lines of the face deepened, then faded. The expression shifted from serene to solemn, to sly. Some claimed the face mirrored their own emotions. Others believed it reflected something much deeper, some ancient truth, or hidden regret, or unspoken longing. No one knew where the mask had come from. The village elder, a man with bones older than trees, insisted it had always been there. When asked if he remembered the shrine being built, he would pause, eyes misting, and simply say, "The mask remembers before me." Outsiders rarely came. The village, if it ever had a road, had long since been erased by avalanches and time. But word did, on occasion, travel. Once a scholar came from the south, wrapped in furs too fine for the land he entered. He introduced himself with a name no one could pronounce, and eyes that missed nothing. He studied the mask for 3 nights straight. He sketched it, measured it, muttered to it in languages no villager had heard before. On the 4th morning, he was gone. His tent still stood, his books and journals were intact, but he had vanished. The only clue was a single page added to his notebook, written in an unsteady hand reading, "It does not wear a face, it lends them." Since then the shrine has remained undisturbed. No villager dared to touch the mask, not even the most skeptical among them. It was not out of superstition. It was something deeper, an instinct older than stories. You see, each dusk brings not only a new expression, but also a new silence, a silence that feels heavy, as if the air thickens around the mask. Birds do not sing, winds do not whistle, even the snow seems to hold its breath, and in that silence, watchers feel things they cannot explain. Some say the mask shows the face of the person who wore it last, but others believe it shows the face of the person who will wear it next. But how could that be, when no one has touched it? Unless someone already has. There's an old tale told only once a year, during the coldest moon, when the sky is more stars than black. It speaks of a time when the mask was not on a pedestal, but worn in war, a time when kings of the north wore it to see the truths their enemies hid, even the truths hidden from themselves. The mask, the tale says, reveals not what you are but what you become. It is said that one king looked into a mirror while wearing it, and his reflection did not move with him. Instead, it leaned forward, frowned, and turned its back. The king never spoke again. Another story tells of a healer who believed the mask would help her diagnose unseen illnesses. She placed it upon her face and saw the villagers not as they were, but as twisted reflections, each harboring secrets darker than winter. She fled that same night into the mountains, never to be found. Yet perhaps the most whispered tale is not about wearing the mask, but being watched by it. There are those who claim the mask chooses a single villager every year, that during one twilight hour, it will mirror that person's face exactly, expression, eyes, even the smallest scar, a perfect reflection, held just long enough for the chosen to know they've been seen. What happens to them afterward is less consistent. Some grow quiet, retreating from community life. Others become oddly serene, as if they've seen something the rest never will. And then, there are those who disappear entirely, leaving behind nothing but melted snowprints leading toward the shrine. No one speaks of them. There was a child, perhaps no more than 6, who asked the elder one evening, "Why doesn't the mask have a name?" The elder looked into the fire for a long while and said, "Because names are for things we own, we do not own the mask." Another evening, a woman visiting from a distant fishing port claimed the mask was not of this world at all. She said it was an anchor, a tether for something trying to cross through. She pointed to the lines etched along its edges, glyphs unfamiliar to any known script, and said they were containment. She stayed one night. In the morning she was gone, her footprints leading only halfway down the path before vanishing completely. The snow remembers, but only when asked kindly, and even then, its answers are vague. Sometimes those who sleep near the shrine claim to dream not of their own lives, but of others. A child born beneath 2 suns, a man who walks upside down on endless stone ceilings, a woman who sings entire buildings into existence. Dreams not of fantasy but of lived memory, foreign and strange but undeniably real. And in every dream the same motif, a pale face, expressionless, watching. Once a traveling monk spent a month near the shrine, meditating daily. He said nothing, ate little, and watched the mask every dusk. On the final night, he stood up and said quietly, "It blinked," then he left. The villagers still argue about whether he meant it literally or not. The shrine has no offerings, no incense, no flowers, only silence. The villagers say that to offer something is to ask something in return, and the mask they fear always asks more than you can give. On rare occasions, during storms when the wind howls louder than thought, a humming can be heard near the shrine. Not a song, not a voice, just a low, bone-deep vibration that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. Those who hear it often claim the mask looks different afterward. Not changed, just older. The last recorded attempt to move the mask came 2 generations ago. A fire had spread through the village, and the elder at the time ordered the shrine to be cleared. But when the villagers approached with trembling hands and sleds padded with cloth, they found the mask impossibly heavy, not in weight, but in will. They could not lift it. One man claimed it felt like lifting a mountain with a spoon. Another said his hands began to burn when he got close. So the shrine remained. The fire stopped before it reached the doors. Some said it was luck, others that the mask had chosen to remain. There is no final truth in the village, only stories. Stories passed through steam breath and firelight, over bowls of root stew and silence. Stories told not to explain but to remember, to warn, to wonder. And so the mask sits, waiting for dusk, for the exact moment when the sky turns from gold to bruised blue, when shadows stretch just a little too far, and the world forgets which face belongs to whom. And in that moment, it shifts. Not to scare, not to mimic, but to remind that beneath every face lies another, and another, and another still, until even the reflection cannot say which was first. The house that moves when you're not looking. There is a place, they say, tucked somewhere beyond the last road on the oldest map, where a house stands that never rests in one place for long. No village claims it, no cartographer marks it, and no 2 travelers swear they've seen it in the same valley twice. And if you do find it, and some do by accident or misfortune, or something in between, you'll remember the way it leans slightly to the left, how the chimney smokes though the fireplace is cold, and how, if you blink too long, it just isn't there anymore. They call it many things in the old books: the wanderer's cottage, the drifting hearth, the house that doesn't wait. But the name that's persisted longest in whispered tales and creaky pub corners is the house that moves when you're not looking. No one builds a house like that. You don't hire a mason or carpenter, or even find ancient blueprints for it in a forgotten archive. No, the house feels older than any plan, older than stone, as if the trees remember when it first arrived, confused to find a roof and door among their roots. It's not an imposing home, no taller than 2 stories, made of timber and grey slate. Ivy hangs from the windowsills like tired arms, and moss gathers on the shingles, always damp, always green. Sometimes travelers claim it looks freshly swept, the lanterns glowing softly as if expecting guests. Others swear the shutters bang violently even when there is no wind, and the front gate groans like a ship lost at sea. And yet, despite it all, the inside is where the house truly begins to trouble you. Step in through the front door, and you'll find yourself in a room that smells of cedarwood and something else, distant rain, or maybe the breath of someone long gone. The floorboards creak gently underfoot, but not always where you step. Sometimes a sound will come from the opposite corner, as if another visitor mirrored your path. The furniture seems to rearrange itself with each glance. A chair that sat by the fire a moment ago now waits politely near the bookshelf. The rug unfurls and folds again depending on whether you're watching, and the mirror over the mantel never shows quite what you expect. Often it reflects not what is behind you, but something else entirely, a hallway you haven't yet entered. A person who looks like you but older, or younger, or wrong in some deep, quiet way. Upstairs the rooms are not where they were before. You could swear the bedroom was to the left, but now there's only a wall. Open a door expecting a closet, and you may find stairs spiraling downward instead. Too many stairs, more than the height of the house allows. Some say the house is alive, and not in the metaphorical way. They mean it breathes, that it listens, that it watches through the fogged glass of its windows. Others believe it's not one house at all, but a kind of junction, where dozens of forgotten homes from different times and places overlap. A great collision of rooms that never met until the house stitched them together. Still others believe the house is trying to tell a story. That every room, every strange object, every half-burned candle and faded photograph is a clue to some deeper tale. A puzzle left by its maker, or perhaps its former occupants, if any ever stayed long enough to leave a mark. There's the room with the 7 clocks, all ticking, none in time with the others. One of them is always a minute ahead of you, another is always behind. They cannot be adjusted. There's a cupboard that opens only once, not once per person, once ever. And what you find inside depends entirely on what you're afraid to find. There's a hallway that ends in a window, looking out onto a garden you don't remember passing. The garden is always in bloom, always spring, and always out of reach. And then there's the room with the door that cannot be opened. Not locked, not sealed, just stubborn. Some say you can hear humming from the other side. Others claim it's weeping. The people who leave the house if they find their way out are not quite the same. Not damaged, not mad, just tilted. Like the house left fingerprints on them. They find doors in their homes where there were none before. Their clocks behave strangely. Their reflections blink just a little too slowly. And at night, if they dream of floorboards that groan beneath invisible feet. There are a handful of stories scattered across centuries that speak of the house appearing in times of need. One tale tells of a soldier lost in snow, stumbling upon the warm hearth just before his final breath. He awoke in the house, safe, fed, alone. When he left, the world had moved on by 10 years. Another tells of a grieving mother who found herself at its door on a moonless night, carrying the last photograph of her child. Inside, she found rooms that echoed laughter she hadn't heard in years. She stayed 3 days. When she returned home, the photo had changed. The child was older, smiling, standing in front of the house. But most who find it do not return, not because they cannot, but because the house chooses. It appears when it wants, moves when it wills, and if it takes a liking to you, it might keep you a while longer than you expect. Sometimes the house mimics things from your memory, a hallway from your childhood home, the scent of your grandmother's kitchen, a sound you'd forgotten, but recognize instantly, the rustle of pages in your father's study, a familiar knock, a song you used to hum without realizing, and then, just as quickly, it takes them away, replaces them with things you've never known, a cracked doll with your name carved in it, a book written in a language only you can understand, a map showing a place that doesn't exist, but which you feel drawn to nonetheless, and when you turn around, the door you entered through is gone. They say the house is not haunted in the traditional sense. There are no chains, no moaning specters, but it is full of ghosts, not people, necessarily, but moments, possibilities, versions of you that never were, and never will be again. Sometimes when you're in one of its many forgotten rooms, you might hear footsteps that follow too closely. You might feel a hand on your shoulder, light and unsure, and if you speak aloud, asking, "Who's there?" you may not get an answer, but you may hear your own voice respond, from behind you. No one builds a house like that, but maybe someone called it into being, a forgotten god, a lonely architect, a sorrow so deep it needed a form. The house doesn't ask for offerings, but it accepts memories. If you stay too long, you may forget the color of your mother's eyes, the shape of your first pet's bark, the sound of your laughter, and in exchange you'll gain memories that never belonged to you, running through a desert you've never seen, kissing someone whose name you don't know, screaming at a shadow that slithers up a wall in slow, unnatural movements, and always the feeling that you're not walking through the house. The house is walking through you. Some scholars believe the house is a tear in space, where all the forgotten corners of the world leak through, a place where the edges of reality fray, and all the stories that never found endings gather like dust. It explains the doors that lead to nowhere, and the ones that lead to places too vast to fit inside a single home. It explains the stars you sometimes see from the attic window, stars not found on any chart, constellations shaped like things we dare not name. Others think it's a test, that those who find the house are being asked a question, but no one can agree on what the question is. What do you see when you close your eyes? What are you willing to forget? How far would you follow a hallway if you knew it would never end? In the end, the house that moves when you're not looking doesn't need you to understand it. It only needs you to step inside, and when you do, even if you think you've left it behind, knew this, somewhere, a window will open, a rug will fold itself neatly, a mirror will tilt, just slightly, and in that quiet house, now somewhere else entirely, a chair will begin to rock gently in a room with no breeze, waiting for the next guest. The statue that weeps salt in the rain, they say it cries only when the clouds roll low, when the winds hush in reverence, and the first cold drops of rain settle over the stone, like memories returning. Some call it a miracle, others, a warning. But all agree, there is something not quite right about the statue that weeps salt in the rain. We begin far from where you are now, far across oceans and forests and faded maps, in a high glacial valley few have ever seen, and fewer still remember. Here, encircled by old stone ridges shaped like broken teeth, there lies a basin of moss and wind-blown ash, and at its heart, a statue unlike any other. It stands taller than a man, yet with the posture of one bowed in quiet mourning. Its arms hang at its sides, long and strangely proportioned, with fingers that brush the edges of its plinth, like they once knew movement. Its face is indistinct, blurred, as if unfinished or worn by more than mere weather. But from its hollowed eyes, down its cheeks and over its chest, streaks form whenever the rain comes. Streaks of white that glisten like tears and crust like salt. No one knows who carved it. There are no markings, no tool grooves, no symbols to trace. The stone is not local either. It's older than the glacier that birthed the valley, older than the mountain itself, some say. Some whisper it was found, not made. Others claim it was once buried and chose to emerge. The first written record we have comes from a 14th century monk named Elian, whose crumbling journal was discovered centuries later in a ruined monastery many miles from the valley. In a scrawled Latin hand, he writes, "In the cleft beyond the dead pines, I found the idol. It stood alone, watching. I made no sound, but still it turned its face to me. When the rains came, it wept. And I, in return, wept also." Scholars dismissed his writing as allegory, until a modern expedition, nearly 600 years later, stumbled upon the same cleft. The pines were still there, though most lay dead, and nestled between two worn rock walls, cloaked in lichen and silence, they found it. The statue, just as described. The team took photographs, samples, even tried to date the stone, but nothing definitive came back. The salt tested wasn't from the surrounding soil. In fact, the compound was more closely aligned with ancient marine sediment, something impossible at that altitude. It was as if the statue itself remembered a sea long since gone. A geologist who studied the site for several weeks claimed the salt trails followed no consistent pattern. They sometimes twisted into strange spiral arcs, other times, they etched crude geometric shapes down the statue's flanks. Once, during a week of constant drizzle, the trails aligned in a way that eerily resembled human script, though no one could decipher it. One night, during a heavier than expected storm, 2 members of the camp reported hearing what they described as soft vocal sobbing, though no one else heard it. Their recording equipment picked up nothing, save for wind and rain, and the faint creak of shifting rock. By morning, both researchers had packed up and left without explanation. Their journals were found later, but nearly all pages had been torn out, and still the statue remained. A local legend predates even Elian's journal, passed down through the oral traditions of shepherding communities who once grazed their flocks nearby. They called it La Pietra del Mar Triste, the stone of the sorrowful sea. They believed it marked the place where a goddess fell in love with a mortal and betrayed, was turned to salt by her own grief. Another version tells of a village swallowed by a flood, brought down by the gods. Only one survived. The weeping witness, turned to stone to bear eternal memory. And perhaps it is memory, more than mystery, that makes the statue weep. Strange patterns emerge, the longer one looks. Some visitors describe fleeting impressions, a warmth along the palm of the statue's stone hand, a change in expression when glimpsed from the corner of the eye, or the sudden metallic tang of seawater on their tongue as rain begins to fall. One climber claimed he saw his own reflection in its face, not just reflected but distorted, as though it were a version of him older, sadder, knowing something he had yet to learn. A linguist from Prague, studying the salt trails with high-resolution scans, identified repeating symbols that correlated with certain ancient proto-languages, not enough to translate, but enough to suggest that the statue, in some long-forgotten way, might be writing something. Yet the salt never remains. It dissolves, evaporates, leaves behind only the faintest shimmer on the stone surface, traces of sadness erased again and again. No one lives near the basin now. The nearest inhabited place is a half-day's hike, and still, every so often, someone goes missing in the region, only to return changed, silent, wide-eyed, unable to recall why they left in the first place. One such person, a botanist named Arlen, vanished during a solo survey in early spring. She was found 3 days later, unhurt but barefoot, seated cross-legged before the statue, humming softly. When asked what happened, she said only, "I stayed to listen." To what, they asked? She blinked. The ocean. But there is no ocean here. Not for hundreds of miles. Not for 1,000,000 years, perhaps. And yet, maybe there was. Maybe the statue remembers it. Or maybe, just maybe, it's dreaming it back into being. In the decades since its rediscovery, no one has successfully moved the statue, not for lack of trying. Foundations cracked, ropes frayed, cranes malfunctioned. One attempt resulted in a landslide that buried the equipment, but left the statue untouched. It does not want to leave. Some claim the valley itself is part of the secret, that beneath its grasses and glacier-fed streams, something sleeps or waits, and the statue is its sentinel, or its sorrow, carved in warning. On satellite scans, the valley shows as an oddly symmetrical depression, almost too perfect to be natural. Some say it matches the layout of sunken cities in myth, concentric circles, radial lines. But those are just shapes, right? Even now, as storms grow stranger and glaciers retreat, the statue remains, weeping salt in the rain. Perhaps it's mourning something we've forgotten, or something we're about to lose. Whatever the truth is, it stands there still, silent, stoic, watching. And when the first drops begin to fall, the tears return. Not water, never water, always salt, as though it is remembering the sea, or warning us that it's coming back. The chamber lit by a flame that shouldn't burn, beneath a mountain no map dares to mark, in a region where satellite signals fray and ancient folklore clings like the scent of wood smoke, there is a place even seasoned explorers avoid, not out of fear, but out of a strange, unanimous silence, a communal forgetting, as though those who might remember it choose not to. You would not stumble upon it. There is no trail, no shrine, no sign, just a thin, dark crack in a limestone cliffside, partially hidden behind an evergreen whose roots drink from some unseen stream, and whose needles whisper too softly to be heard. The entrance is narrow, unwelcoming. It breathes cold air outward in gentle exhales, as though the mountain is alive and does not wish to be disturbed. Those who've been here before, if any truly have, left nothing behind. No scratched initials, no marker stones, no breadcrumbs for the curious. Only the stories, if you can find them, fragments buried in footnotes of forgotten books, dusty margins of monastery scrolls, or the hushed warnings of forest elders who glance toward the peaks and fall quiet. They say that deep within the mountain, in a chamber no wider than a chapel, burns a flame that never dies. It isn't made of oil or wax, nor fed by gas or air. It burns in absolute stillness. No flicker, no smoke, just light, steady, impossible. It casts no heat, and yet warms the stone around it, and it has done so, uninterrupted, for centuries, maybe longer. Some claim it's a remnant of the first fire, a primordial flame kindled at the dawn of time by hands no longer human. Others believe it's the last breath of a dying god, sealed away to prevent it from fading. A few speak of ancient engineers, artificers whose knowledge rivaled science and surpassed myth, who forged a light source so perfect it defies decay. But all agree on one thing: the flame should not exist. The path to the chamber is not natural. It curves in ways no tectonic plate could carve. The walls at first are rough, cold with moisture and dust, but as you descend deeper, they grow smoother, almost polished, like stone work not by tools but by pressure, heat, and time beyond imagining. The air changes too, not just in temperature, but in quality, thicker, denser, filled with something you can't name, not scent, not humidity, something else, like memory. About 40 feet in, the light from the outside vanishes entirely. You're left in absolute blackness, unless you bring your own. And yet even the most powerful torches feel muted, their beams absorbed by the stone or redirected into strange patterns. Shadows behave erratically, they lengthen and warp without motion. Sound begins to lag too, as though the walls are listening, measuring, calculating each footstep. Some explorers describe the sensation of walking into a memory that doesn't belong to them. Visions flicker at the edge of sight, a girl dropping a clay vessel in surprise, a hand chiseling unfamiliar symbols into a slab, a fire roaring against a windless sky. None of it makes sense, and all of it fades as quickly as it arrives, leaving only the pressure of being watched by something vast and patient. There is a gate, or something like a gate. It isn't metal, or wood, rather. It appears as a thick sheet of translucent material stretched across the tunnel, like glass that hums softly. Pressing against it produces a tingling sensation, not unlike brushing against static, and when you pass through, because somehow you can, you don't feel yourself move so much as skip, like time blinking for a moment. Beyond it, the tunnel opens into the chamber. No words prepare you for it. It's circular, dome-like, about 30 feet across, with a ceiling that curves into a point like the inside of an egg. The stone here is different, darker, smooth as river pebbles, and faintly reflective. Every step echoes not once, but twice, with a slight delay, as if another step, unseen, follows your own. The temperature remains cool, but never uncomfortably so. You are aware, immediately and completely, that you are not alone. At the center of the chamber, hovering inches above a short stone pedestal, is the flame. It is no taller than a candle's flame, no wider than your palm, but it is impossibly bright, bright enough to cast crisp shadows across the walls, yet not harsh to the eyes. It has no color. Or perhaps it has all colors layered and spinning so fast, they appear as one. Looking into it feels like gazing through time itself. It does not move. No flicker, no wind, just presence. Some say it pulses faintly in rhythm with the heartbeat of the observer. There are no inscriptions around it, no artifacts, no offerings, only 7 small indentations in the floor, arranged in a ring around the pedestal, almost like foot placements, though not shaped for any foot you recognize. Each depression is precisely carved and smooth, and if you kneel beside them, you'll notice something stranger still. Each emits a different subtle tone when tapped. A scale, perhaps. A song lost to time. Theories abound. One suggests the flame is not flame at all, but a stabilized tear in space, a pinhole through which the energy of a parallel realm leaks eternally. Another claims it's the soul of the mountain itself, crystallized into light and trapped in perpetual mourning. A third posits the chamber is a machine, and the flame its heart, part of a system that, if understood, could power cities or collapse continents. But no one has ever been able to extinguish it, or duplicate it, or explain it. Attempts have been made to study it, of course, portable labs brought in, readings taken, samples collected, yet nothing remains consistent. Radiation spikes vanish on retests, temperature logs overwrite themselves, equipment fails or returns contradictory data, photos emerge blank, audio recordings pick up voices that were never spoken, whispers in languages no linguist recognizes. One researcher reported that her shadow lagged behind her for over 10 seconds. Another claimed the flame whispered her name in the voice of her grandmother. Both left the chamber changed. The former disappeared 3 months later, last seen wandering the Scottish Highlands. The latter never spoke again, but now draws spirals compulsively on every surface. A government agency once tried to seal the chamber permanently. They brought explosives, sensors, a team of engineers. The tunnel collapsed as planned. But 3 weeks later, a shepherd from a nearby village found a new entrance, half a mile away, concealed beneath a landslide that hadn't been there the day before. The flame was still burning. No one knows how deep the chamber really is, geologically speaking. Ground-penetrating radar yields nonsense data, depths that exceed the mountain's own height, structures that spiral beneath the earth, like roots made of geometry. Some maps show echoes of the chamber in other parts of the world, Tibet, Bolivia, Ethiopia. But these are only rumors, and then there's the dream. It's said that once you've seen the flame, even once, you will dream of it. Not immediately, sometimes weeks later, sometimes years, but always the same. You stand in the chamber, alone. The flame is brighter than before. Around you figures gather, cloaked in shadow, faceless, tall. They hum a low, resonant chord. One by one they step into the flame and vanish. You are the last, and as you approach it, the dream always ends, but not in darkness, in light. Some never wake up. There is a line from an anonymous monk's journal, circa 1283, preserved in a monastery, that no longer exists. The light that knows no oil burns still beneath the bones of the mountain. I touched its warmth and forgot the year. I saw my own death reflected in its shimmer, and it was not mine. We are not the first. We are not meant to understand, but it is waiting, always waiting, and so it remains. A flame without fuel, a chamber without time, a mountain that dreams, waiting perhaps not to be discovered, but remembered. The oracle stoned, that hums at dawn. It begins with a sound, not loud, not melodic, not even something you'd describe as particularly musical. It is soft, low, barely on the edge of hearing, a deep, steady hum that seems to ripple through the bones before the ears. And it happens, always, just before dawn. No one knows when the humming started. The villagers in the mist-veiled foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains say it has always been there, as far back as anyone can remember. Before radio, before trains, before the borders. The sound would come just before the first grey light touched the sky, like the last sigh of a world remembering itself. At the center of it all stands the oracle stone. It's not easy to find, not marked on maps, and not spoken of with any kind of directness. The few who have made the pilgrimage describe it as a glistening shard of black rock taller than any man, half buried in a clearing of frozen grass and whispering pines. It is smooth, impossibly so, as if no chisel had ever touched it, yet it bears the faded symbols of an alphabet no one has ever managed to decipher, not entirely. They say the stone predates language, that it was there before the forests, before the mountains, before people had names for the sky. But even in its silence, the oracle speaks, if not in words, then in something older. For centuries the people in the surrounding villages have lived in respectful distance from it. Every so often, someone would leave offerings at its base, a feather, a woven ribbon, a crust of bread. Never anything extravagant, never anything loud, just a gesture, a sign that it was remembered, respected, and above all, not disturbed. The trouble always begins when someone tries to listen too closely. In 1924, an ethnographer named Elena Costa arrived in the region on horseback, documenting folk beliefs and oral traditions for the Tsarist archive. The oracle stone was a local curiosity, just a footnote in one of her guide's rambling accounts. But Elena, fiercely curious, obsessed with the unprovable, took an interest. She stayed longer than she meant to. Days turned into weeks. Each morning she would rise before the sun and sit near the stone, trying to transcribe the sound. She said she could feel it vibrating through the soil. Then one morning, she was gone. Her tent was still there, her notebooks half filled with looping Cyrillic and sketches of the stone's surface, but no one ever saw her again. The locals said, in hushed tones, that the stone had taken her, that the oracle had given her an answer too heavy to bear. It wouldn't be the last disappearance. In the 1970s, a Soviet geophysicist named Lev Orlov led a short-lived expedition to study the stone. He brought seismic equipment, sensors, translators. The team camped out for 5 days. On the 6th they were evacuated by helicopter, without explanation. Orlov never published a single paper from the trip. A few years later, he was found wandering a train station in Almaty, mumbling something about the hum beneath all things. He never spoke again. What makes the oracle stone so strange is that it hums only at dawn, and only when the sky is perfectly clear. Rain silences it. Snow muffles it. Clouds confuse it. But when the sky is empty and the cold air sharp as glass, the sound emerges, gentle, low, alive. Some say it's the resonance of the earth itself. Others think it's a leftover relic of something artificial, alien perhaps, buried far below. But the villagers say it's a question, a single, endless question the world keeps asking itself, over and over. The hum has no language, but it speaks of things you've forgotten, faces in dreams, the smell of wind before lightning, the feeling of being watched in a place where nothing lives. It curls into the mind slowly. The longer you stay, the louder it seems. Some say it's a kind of temptation, a siren not of sound but of meaning. In 2003, a filmmaker named Morgan Dell ventured into the region with a small crew. They were working on a documentary about acoustic anomalies around the world. The footage they captured was never released. According to a leaked account from one of the sound engineers, every microphone near the stone would pick up a faint rhythm, like breath caught inside stone. When they tried to isolate the frequency, the recordings warped, hard drives failed, batteries drained. One morning, just before sunrise, Dell reportedly stepped toward the oracle with a parabolic mic, and then he just kept walking, through the snow, into the trees. Never came back. Some think it's a naturally occurring phenomenon, subterranean gas pockets, magnetic fields, maybe even ice fractures under extreme thermal conditions. But there's something about it that resists explanation. You can model pressure systems, you can chart geological anomalies, but you can't measure the feeling of being inside a question that refuses to end. Sometimes, those who have been near it report dreams, vivid, unsettling, dreams of rooms without walls, of voices that speak without mouths, of stars falling in reverse. Many wake up weeping, unable to say why. One woman, a botanist named Raya, who visited the site in the late 80s, claimed the hum was not a sound at all, but a memory. She described the oracle as a mirror made of silence, but when you sit with it long enough, it doesn't tell you anything, it just shows you what you already know, but refuse to see. She returned from her trip thin and quiet. She left her career, took a job as a librarian, never spoke of the stone again. Some believe the oracle is part of a network, one of several such stones hidden across the planet. There are rumors of a similar hum in the Peruvian Andes, deep in the Amazon, and even beneath the sands of the Arabian desert. The tones differ, but they share the same impossible texture: old, slow, exact. A small group of researchers has attempted to map these so-called resonant monoliths. They call them points of convergence. Their theory, that these are remnants of an older world, not a civilization, but a kind of planetary consciousness, encoded not in language, but vibration. Every few years, someone else tries to find the oracle. Most don't make it. The terrain is harsh, maps are vague, local guides often refuse, fearing the stone's attention. And then of course, there's the weather. The stone does not hum for just anyone. You have to be there at the right moment. You have to be quiet enough to hear it. And perhaps, you have to want an answer so badly, you're willing to be undone by it. No one knows how deep the oracle runs beneath the earth. Core samples are inconclusive, ground-penetrating radar fails to return usable data. It's as if the stone is not entirely in our world, or not entirely interested in staying within it. What's most strange is this: though the stone bears no inscription that we can read, its surface is etched with patterns that seem to shift depending on the time of day, like a sundial with a language made of shadow. At noon, it shows one shape, at twilight, another. But at dawn, just as the humming begins, witnesses have claimed to see fleeting glyphs ripple across its surface, like reflections on black water. In these moments, some say you can see your own name, not your given name, not the one printed on papers, but something older, the name the world gave you when it first dreamt you into being. And if you hear it, really hear it, it changes something. You do not come back from that kind of knowing unchanged. So the oracle remains, it hums, it waits, it remembers. And as the world grows louder, it continues to ask the one question no one has yet learned how to answer. What do you hope to find that you're willing to lose everything to understand? The cavern of mirrors that show other lifetimes. In the high reaches of a forgotten range, where the wind howled like a memory too long buried, and the clouds skimmed low enough to touch the jagged stones, there was a path that few followed. It was not marked on any map, nor spoken of in any guide. The villagers below called it the path of vanishing things. A trail that began clear and well-worn, but which grew fainter with every step, as though the earth itself wished to erase it. Only those who had dreamed of it could find it. And even then, only those who had dreamed it more than once. Rhea was such a traveler. She had woken 3 nights in a row with the same image, a silver-framed mirror half buried in a cave wall, its surface rippling like water, and within it, a woman who looked like her, but older, stronger, and somehow sadder. The dreams were not frightening, but they left her breathless, heart thrumming with a need she could not name. She packed little: a satchel of dried berries, a flask of water, a coil of twine, and a notebook, so worn the corners had curled like autumn leaves. She told no one where she was going. How could she? It was not a destination she could point to on a map. It was a place she remembered without ever having been. The climb was not easy. The path narrowed, steepened, twisted through thorn and stone. Birds fell silent as she ascended. The air grew thinner, tasting of frost and old secrets. The world below faded into mist and forgetfulness, until Rhea could no longer remember the sound of her own door closing behind her. Only the dream remained, guiding her feet. She reached the mouth of the cavern at dusk. It looked nothing like she expected. No jagged maw or yawning tunnel, just a low, rounded arch in the mountainside, framed in frost-kissed ivy and dusted with fallen leaves. It might have been a shepherd's shelter, were it not for the silence that oozed from within. A silence too deep, too absolute, the kind of silence that made your ears ring with the absence of time. Rhea stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Warmer, yes, but also heavier. It clung to her skin, as though the cavern itself had lungs and had exhaled onto her. The walls shimmered faintly with veins of mineral light, hues that flickered between violet and gold, and deeper in, past the bend where sunlight could no longer reach, the mirrors began. Not one, not two, but hundreds. They were set into the stone like fossilized windows. No frames, no support, just mirror after mirror, grown straight from the rock. Some were cracked, others pristine, and each was alive. They didn't show her reflection, not exactly. Each mirror shimmered with movement, fragments of scenes, whole lives playing out in silence behind the glass. In one, she saw herself as a child kneeling beside a pool, her hair braided with river grass. In another, she stood on the deck of a great ship, wind in her face, her eyes cold and proud. A third showed her as an old woman hunched over a candle-lit desk, quill in hand, tears in her eyes as she wrote in a language she did not recognize. She stepped closer to that one. The mirror's surface trembled at her approach, not repelling her, but welcoming. A hum began, low and pulsing, like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. The closer she got, the more the scene sharpened. The woman in the mirror paused in her writing. Slowly she lifted her head and looked directly at Rhea. The connection struck like lightning. Rhea staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The woman in the mirror tilted her head, sorrow in her eyes. Her mouth moved. No sound came. But Rhea understood. Remember me. The mirror went dark. Rhea stood in the silence that followed, feeling the echo of those two silent words stretch across her skin like a chill. The cavern was still, but not dead. Something had noticed her, that much was certain. She turned from the now dark mirror and wandered deeper. The deeper she went, the older the mirrors seemed. Some had gone dim entirely, their surfaces cracked, like dried clay. Others still pulsed faintly, flickering with pale images, flickers of past lives, half-glimpsed memories, or dreams once lived by other selves. Here the mirrors stood, not only in the walls, but in pillars that grew like stalagmites from the floor. She passed between them, like a ghost drifting through its own mausoleum. One mirror showed her dressed in armor, a banner in her fist, standing before a walled city aflame. Another showed her bent over a loom, grey-haired and humming as a child watched from the corner. One mirror, cold, blue and still, showed her sitting in a garden of snow, eyes closed, her hands resting atop a grave. They were all her, all versions of her, echoes from other lifetimes, some long past, others not yet lived. She began to touch them, one at a time. Each touch sent a jolt up her arm, not pain, but sensation, as if she were stepping briefly into the moment behind the glass. The scents, the sounds, the emotions, they washed over her in waves. Pride, fear, regret, joy so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. But always, always, the same message. Remember me. Some mirrors were more intense than others. One mirror showed her standing in a vast library, with endless ceilings, reading aloud to a group of faceless listeners. Another had her wandering through a forest, where the trees whispered her name in dozens of languages. There were versions of her who had been teachers, warriors, healers, scribes, weavers, wanderers, outcasts. And there were mirrors, darker ones, that pulsed with sorrow. She avoided those at first, but the cavern had a way of pulling her where it wanted. Eventually, she stood before a mirror that throbbed with low sound, like a drumbeat slowed to the tempo of stone. This mirror was unlike the others. It was perfectly round, set flush with the floor. Its surface was not silver but obsidian black, polished to a terrifying clarity. No image stirred within it, just shadow. But when she stepped over it, her foot met not stone but nothingness. She fell through. The sensation was like being swallowed by breath. For an instant no more. Rhea thought she had died. There was no air, no light, no sound. Then slowly, something unfurled, like a page turning in reverse. She was no longer in the cavern. She was walking through a corridor lined with torches, her boots echoing on flagstones worn by time. She was taller here, stronger. A thick cloak brushed her calves, and in her hand she held a ring of keys. Memory came as a whisper, not hers, yet intimately familiar. This was not a dream, this was a life. She passed guards who nodded to her, their faces blurring into symbols of loyalty and fear. She knew where she was going, down into the holding cells, past the doors carved with sigils, deeper into the earth, where only the condemned were taken. A name rose in her chest like smoke, Telen Var. She was warden here, and she was bringing judgment. As she descended, the sense of wrongness grew, not because of what she was doing, but because this had all happened before. A moment later, she stood before a cell. Inside it sat a man, thin, half mad, his eyes gleaming in the shadows. He looked up, and a slow grin spread across his face. So he whispered, "You've come back to end it, or to begin it again." And then, everything collapsed. She was back in the cavern, breath ragged, knees buckling. The obsidian mirror beneath her pulsed once with deep crimson light, then went dark. It had shown her not just another lifetime, but one that still lingered in her bones. She sat there a long while, trying to understand what she had just lived. The man's voice still rang in her ears. His words hadn't been random. They'd meant something. Come back to end it, or begin it again. How many times had she been here? Was this truly her first visit, or was she walking a loop she had already traced 1,000 times? The cavern no longer felt like a place beneath the earth. As Rhea sat beside the obsidian mirror, breath slowly returning, she realized the air had shifted. The silence was no longer just the hush of stone. It carried something beneath it now, presence, a watchfulness, ancient and vast, older than names or memory. It did not speak, but it knew her. She rose, legs unsteady, and continued walking. The mirrors grew stranger as she went. Some now floated freely in mid-air, suspended in pockets of stillness like droplets caught in amber. Others spun slowly, showing not just reflections but motion, stories unfolding in flickers too quick to follow. Some mirrors had fractured and reformed into impossible shapes, spirals, triangles that turned in on themselves, jagged crescents that hummed faintly as she passed. And the images inside them, they began to bleed into one another. One mirror showed her on a battlefield, sword drawn, blood in her mouth. Another showed her standing at a market stall, wrapped in rough wool, trading honey for grain. A third showed her atop a tower beneath two moons, studying a map inked in starlight. But now the lives were not staying in their own frames. Moments spilled over. The woman at the market looked up, and across the glass, saw herself on the battlefield. The Rhea in one life was becoming aware of the Rhea in others. Some mirrors vibrated when she passed. Others shattered the moment her gaze met theirs, leaving only dust and a faint chime like laughter. Then came the one she had somehow known was coming. It was tall, arched, its frame carved in bone and copper. Unlike the others, this mirror had no image, just darkness, flat, deep, unmoving. But it called to her, not with sound, but with something deeper than instinct. She stepped forward, and this time, the mirror stepped toward her. It was not a portal, it was a door. It swung open, not outward, but inward, and the air beyond it was thick with heat, dust and distant bells. She did not hesitate. The world beyond was blinding. Golden sky, sand, 1,000 silk tents waving in the wind. People in long robes, faces hidden behind veils, walked past her without seeing her. She stood in a vast desert encampment, at the edge of a city carved from cliffside stone. Towering spires shimmered in the distance, and music, gentle, strange, wove through the air like threads of incense. Here, she was young again, barefoot, her hair braided with glass beads. Her hands held a small glowing orb, the size of a plum, pulsing within a light. She was running, laughing, through the tents. Another girl ran beside her. Her face was familiar, too familiar. It was herself, not a version, not a mirror. Herself, her current self, watching a younger self, alive in this place, unaware. The younger Rhea dropped the orb. It struck the sand and shattered with a burst of silver dust. Everything around her froze. The tents, the people, the air itself. And the child turned slowly, looked straight at her older self. Her eyes, Rhea's own eyes, were full of knowing. "You're waking up too early," she said softly. Rhea tried to speak, couldn't. "You're not supposed to be here yet," the girl went on. "You've opened too many doors. You've touched too many mirrors." She bent down, lifted the shattered orb, which was whole again. "But you always do, don't you? You always come looking." Rhea finally found her voice. "Looking for what?" The girl gave her a sad smile. "Yourself." And with that, she turned and vanished into the golden light. The desert folded. The mirror returned. Back in the cavern, Rhea stood shaking. It was no longer enough to say these were visions, not memories, not imagination. Something was guiding her, something within the mirrors, and within herself. The cavern wasn't a place, not in the usual sense. It was a memory of a place she had always been. Her lives weren't laid out like a trail behind her. They were stacked, layered, woven. She was beginning to see the threads, and something was watching to see how far she'd follow them. She turned to the next mirror. It was shaped like a keyhole, and she suddenly understood. This next one wouldn't show a life. It would unlock a truth. The mirror, shaped like a keyhole, shimmered with a pale internal light. Not silver like the others. Not reflective at all. It looked instead like moonstone, clouded, gentle, softly glowing from within. Rhea reached out. Her fingers passed through. No vision swept her away. No desert. No battlefield. No towers under strange skies. Instead, the mirror swallowed all light and sound, and for the first time since she entered the cavern, there was nothing. No self. No mirrors. No sense of body or thought. Just quiet. But then presence returned. It was not watching her this time. It was within her, and she began to remember. Not stories. Not glimpses. Not the lives shown in the glass. but something deeper, something older than all of them. The moment before the mirrors, before time. She remembered why the cavern existed. It was not made by hands. It was not carved into stone. It was not left behind by any civilization. The cavern of mirrors was a pattern, not a place. A structure folded into the fabric of consciousness itself. Each mirror was a junction point, where one soul touched another version of itself, across lifetimes and worlds. Each life she'd seen, warrior, scribe, dreamer, peasant, queen, was not an echo or illusion. They were all her, not reincarnations, not alternatives. Just Rhea, looking at herself from different angles, like light refracted through crystal, and the cavern. It had not pulled her in. She had made it. Long ago, in some first flicker of awareness, she had created this sacred place as a reminder, so that, if she ever forgot who she truly was, lost in the drama and forgetting of individual lifetimes, she could find her way back to this center, back to herself. The mirrors had never shown what she used to be, they had shown her what she is. The whole pattern, the full being behind every face and name and story. She opened her eyes. The cavern was gone. There was no stone, no dark, no tunnel. She stood on a windswept hill under a violet sky, ringed by standing stones. Birds wheeled far above, and grass whispered around her feet. In her hand was a small shard of black glass, smooth, polished, humming faintly with warmth. She tucked it into her pouch and walked toward the sunrise. She did not need the mirrors anymore, but she would remember them. And one day, far in another life, perhaps another soul, another version of her, would find their way to the cavern again. They too would walk its silent halls, search the shimmering reflections, ask the same questions, and maybe, just maybe, they would remember what she now knew, that every mirror shows a truth, and every truth brings you home. The fortress of bones in the salt wastes. They say the salt wastes were once a sea, not a sea of water, but of sound, a place where wind moved like memory, and the dunes whispered old secrets in languages no one had spoken in 1,000 years. Now, it is a land of silence. Nothing grows. Nothing sings. The salt lies thick on the ground like snow that forgot how to melt, and in the deepest part of that vast white desert, far beyond the reach of maps or memory, there rises a shape that should not exist. A fortress, made not of stone, but of bone. You cannot stumble upon it by accident. The salt plays tricks, folding the horizon into endless repetition, until even your footsteps seem to vanish behind you. But if you listen, really listen, to the hush between the wind's sighs, you might hear it calling. A distant hum, like the gnawing of time itself. That is how Rhea found it. Or perhaps it found her. She had walked for 3 days with no compass, no guide, and no certainty she would ever see anything but white salt and grey sky again. Her water was low. Her breath rasped like sandpaper in her throat. But something pulled her forward, something she couldn't name. A memory not her own. A dream she'd never had. Then, just before the 5th sunrise, she saw the shape on the horizon. At first it seemed like a mirage, a trick of heat and light, but as she drew closer, the angles sharpened. Towers, walls, arches and battlements, but no stone, no iron. The walls were ribbed and jagged, pale and weathered as driftwood. Closer still, the truth emerged. Every inch of the fortress was made from bone. Some bleached and splintered, others fused into walls as thick as a cathedral. Skulls, antlers, femurs, assembled into spires and gates, into twisted doors and parapets. No mortar, no carvings, just bone, fitted so precisely it looked grown rather than built. And it was enormous. Not ruined, not buried, whole. The main gate stood 30 feet tall, a ribcage fused into an arch, with vertebrae winding upward like a spiral staircase. Rhea stood beneath it, her shadow swallowed in the structure's own. Her fingers brushed the bone. It was cool, not dry, not brittle, smooth as polished marble. And it thrummed beneath her touch, alive, or once alive. No wind passed through the gate, no animal sounds. Even the salt underfoot grew still. She stepped across the threshold, and silence deepened. Inside, the light dimmed, filtered through lattices of bone. Hallways curved like hollowed sternums. Rooms opened into galleries of ossified relics, massive tusks bound into arches, skulls of beasts she did not recognize, mounted like masks, whole walls made from tiny bird bones arranged in symmetrical spirals, and in every room there were niches. Hundreds of them. empty, as if something had once rested in each one, but was now gone. She passed what must once have been a chapel. Bone pews faced a raised platform where a throne sat, carved from a single gigantic skull. Behind it, a mural, not painted, but formed, bones arranged into a relief that showed a city beneath a sea of stars. The figures in the mural wore no faces. As she wandered deeper, a question began to grow in her. Who built this, and why? The salt wastes stretched for hundreds of miles. No road led here, no caravans, no animal trails. And yet, the structure was not primitive. It had symmetry, purpose, architecture. Whoever had made it knew exactly what they were doing. But the deeper she went, the stranger it became. She found a courtyard at the heart of the fortress, open to the white sky. There, embedded in the salt-crusted floor, lay a spiral of skulls, human or near enough, arranged with perfect spacing. Each faced inward. At the spiral's center sat a small basin, carved from a single hollowed jawbone. It was filled with black sand. She knelt. It wasn't sand. It was ash. She touched it, and a pulse of warmth flickered beneath her skin, like touching the last breath of a fire. The ash clung to her fingers. Her vision blurred, and for just a moment, the sky above changed. It darkened. Not like nightfall, but like eclipse. The clouds parted, and something enormous moved behind them. A shape without edges. A weight without form. She blinked, and the vision passed. The sky was white again, but she was not alone. In the far archway of the courtyard, a figure stood, cloaked. Still, its face was hidden beneath a mask made of animal bone, elongated, sharp, bird-like. It watched her, unmoving. Reshia rose, her breath shallow. The figure raised a hand, not a threat, not a command, just acknowledgement. Then it turned, and vanished into the shadows. She followed, through corridors lined with jawbones, down stairs carved from stacked vertebrae, past doorways that opened into echoing chambers where the air felt heavy, ancient. At last, she entered a long, narrow hall. Here, the walls were entirely made of skulls, row upon row, stacked with mathematical precision, all sizes, all species, all turned to face inward. As she passed, she felt a pressure, like walking beneath 100 gazes, not hostile, not warm, just watching. At the end of the hall, a door, massive, circular. It had no handle, no keyhole, but as she approached, it slowly swung open. The chamber inside was unlike anything she'd seen. Circular, domed, with a vaulted ceiling, formed from the interlocked ribs of some massive creature. At the center stood a sarcophagus, bone of course, etched with spiral symbols that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Around it, 6 pillars, each made of stacked spines, and hanging from the ceiling, just above the sarcophagus, a mobile of skulls, human, animal, unknown, suspended by sinew that did not rot. They spun gently, moved by an unseen current. The cloaked figure stood beside the sarcophagus. It did not speak, but Reshia heard it, not in words, in impressions, images, memories not hers. This was not a tomb, it was a seed. The fortress had not been built as a monument, or a sanctuary, or even a weapon. It was a memory vessel, a structure designed to hold the knowledge of a forgotten war. A war not of territory, but of time. They had called them bone weavers, not a people. Not quite, something older than that. Beings who did not write or speak, but encoded memory into matter. Bone was their script, their history, their means of preserving truth. The fortress was their archive, their testimony. But something had silenced them, a force that consumed memory itself, a forgetting, not ignorance. Erasure. The cloaked figure was the last of them, or a shadow left behind by one. It turned to the sarcophagus and placed a hand on the surface. The spiral runes lit with dull light. The top slid open, not with sound, but a hush like breath. Inside there was no body, only more ash. But this ash shimmered. It moved like water, like smoke, like thought, and it knew her name. Reshia stepped forward. She felt her bones vibrate, not in pain, but resonance. The ash lifted, not physically, but in meaning. She understood it, without translation, without effort. The war had not ended. It had been paused, buried, hidden in salt and silence. But she, by stepping into this place, had awakened the memory, and now it lived in her. She had become the new archive, the new vessel. The cloaked figure faded, the chamber dimmed. The ash settled back into its cradle, but something had changed. Raja walked out of the chamber, back through the skull hall, past the ash basin, beneath the ribbed gate, and the fortress behind her began to fade. Not collapse, not dissolve, just shift, like a dream that no longer needed to be remembered, once passed on. By nightfall, when she turned back to look, there was only salt, but her steps felt different. The weight of memory walked with her, and deep within her chest, in a place beyond language, she felt the hum of the bone weavers still echoing, waiting for the moment the war would return, and the forgetting would face the truth it could not erase. The bridge that crosses nothing but mist. There is a place that appears on no maps, hidden not by remoteness or danger, but by something older, more deliberate, something chosen. Those who speak of it do so in half sentences and swallowed tones, as though the syllables themselves are reluctant to emerge. A bridge, they say, somewhere deep within the folds of fog-bound hills, across a gorge that is not marked by depth or cliff, but by something else entirely, a silence that bends light and memory. They call it the bridge that crosses nothing but mist. It's not easily found. It never has been. Travelers describe walking a dozen times through the same stretch of forest, hearing the same birdsong loop back around like a record. You might cross the same crooked tree route again and again, your path unchanged despite the miles you swear you've walked. But then on the 13th turn, or the 100th, something shifts. The fog thickens, not with moisture, but with presence. It grows dense enough to feel like walking through velvet or breath. And there, quite suddenly, is the bridge. It rises not from the ground but out of it, its base sunken slightly into the forest floor, as though it had always been there, waiting to be remembered. It's made not of stone nor wood, but something between smooth and bone pale, with a texture like polished coral. The archway does not creak or sway, and it gives no resistance underfoot. The bridge is narrow, just wide enough for one person at a time. It has no railings, no ropes, no visible anchors. It simply stretches forward, disappearing into fog so thick that even your hand disappears a few feet in front of your face. What's strange is that there is no opposite end in sight, no cliff, no other side, just fog, unbroken, untouched, unending. People have tried throwing things across, stones, ropes, even mechanical drones. Every time they vanish. Sound too becomes muted on the bridge. A footstep barely echoes, a whisper is swallowed before it can even touch the air. You could scream, and it would sound like a sigh. Locals say if you stand long enough on the threshold of the bridge, the mist begins to shift. It doesn't part, not exactly, but folds, ripples, as though something beyond is noticing you, choosing whether or not to allow you in. There's a story of a man from the nearby village, Old Marek, who claimed to have crossed it once. He'd been missing for 3 days, and when he returned, he was aged, white-haired, gaunt, not physically older, no, but hollowed out. He couldn't explain where he'd been, only that he walked for what felt like hours, and then days, and then something else entirely. He said there were voices in the mist, not spoken aloud, but felt, words not in his language, or any language he knew. He didn't speak of them again after that first telling, and when asked later, he simply stared through people, as if listening for something still reaching out. Some scholars, those who dare, refer to the bridge as a liminal structure, a thin place they call it, where our world is worn at the edges, where dimensions blur, and time frays. The bridge is a threshold not between places, but between states of being, the here and the not here. One researcher, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Yelena Moran, spent 10 years cataloguing sightings of the bridge. She built a map, not of location, but of conditions. It was always seen when the air pressure dropped suddenly, when the moon was gibbous, when the local animals went silent all at once. There were patterns in weather, wind direction, even the pollen count. She once remarked in a conference before her resignation that the bridge had a mood, that it responded not to physics but to attention. She vanished 6 months later. Her last field report was only a single sentence: "I have seen what lies beyond the 4th ripple." No one knows what that means. The bridge does not lead to a destination, at least not in the way we understand. Those who've tried walking it, intrepid explorers, thrill seekers, even monks, speak of strange things. One described a sudden shift where the bridge floor began to pulse, like a heartbeat beneath their feet. Another said the mist began to smell like memories, not things she could name, but feelings, the smell of a childhood toy, a hospital hallway, the skin of someone long dead. Most turn back, some do not. There was one case, an old video clip found on a corrupted memory card, where a man had strapped a camera to his chest. He begins walking. For 10 minutes, the footage is ordinary, quiet, mist-bound. But at the 11-minute mark, something changes, a flicker. The sound distorts. The color shifts slightly. The footage doesn't cut, but the man is no longer the same. His breathing is different. He mumbles things, names, questions. At one point, he stops walking and simply stares into the fog for several minutes. When he turns back to the camera, his eyes are full of tears. He smiles. Then the footage ends. The bridge doesn't always appear in the same place. Sometimes it's in the forest, sometimes on a moor, once on the rooftop of a building no longer standing. It chooses where and when to show itself, and whom to invite. Because that's the strange thing, isn't it? The bridge doesn't just exist, it waits. It does not weather, it does not decay. It's as though it lives between moments, touching down only when someone needs to cross, or when something needs to come through. There's one account, buried in the archives of a forgotten monastery, written by a monk in the 1300s. He spoke of a silver pathway that appeared during a night vigil, leading across a sea of moving clouds. He walked it, following voices that sounded like bells underwater. He described seeing cities made of light and towers grown from crystal. But when he turned back, he was not in the monastery courtyard, but in a forest he did not recognize, with stars that did not match the sky he knew. He wrote his account on dried birch bark and sealed it in wax. The manuscript was found inside the wall of a church in Slovakia, 5 centuries later. So what is the bridge? A remnant of something older than memory. A remnant of something yet to come. There are some who say it's not a bridge at all, that it doesn't go anywhere, that it brings things, that it is a wound in the world, stitched across with pale bone to keep it from bleeding. But perhaps the answer is simpler. Perhaps it is a place where the fabric of the world is just thin enough to remember the others that came before. Other versions of this earth. Other lives, other selves. And when we step onto it, we are stepping not forward, but inward. Crossing not space but significance. Memory, desire, regret. And maybe, just maybe, those who disappear on the bridge are not lost. Maybe they have simply arrived where they were always meant to be. The fog knows, the bridge waits, and it never crosses the same person twice. The drum that sounds once every century. There is a village you will not find on any map, no matter how closely you study its contours, or how many layers of parchment you peel back. It lies nestled within a gorge, where the air is always damp with mist, and the trees lean in as though whispering secrets. They call the place Vale Hollows. Few speak of it aloud now. Fewer still have seen it with waking eyes, but stories drift, like embers riding the wind. Stories of a sound, one so deep it trembles through the marrow, one that arrives like a heartbeat in the earth itself. A drum, a single strike, every 100 years, never twice, never more. Just once, and then silence. It does not mark war, nor ceremony. It does not herald a feast or a funeral. And yet, when it sounds, things happen, things change, people disappear. Some say it is the heartbeat of something buried beneath the gorge. Others say it is a summons, a warning, a countdown. No one remembers who built the drum, but the cave is still there, hidden beneath the roots of an ancient ash tree, older than the calendar, older than language. And inside that cave, by the flickering light of phosphorescent moss and old slow-burning oil that never seems to run out, stands the drum. It is massive, its skin stretched taut across a frame carved with forgotten runes. No vine grows over it, no dust gathers. It is untouched by time, and yet soaked with it, like a sponge left floating in the river of centuries. The last time it sounded was 100 years ago, to the day, and tonight, the villagers feel it again, that strange tightening in the chest, the way shadows lengthen at sunset, and how birds fall silent as though listening. In one cottage near the edge of the gorge, an old woman sits at her loom, weaving not wool, but stories. Her name is Malin, and she has lived longer than most of the trees outside. She doesn't see well anymore, but she remembers. Oh, she remembers the last time the drum called out. She was a child then, 8, perhaps. The night it sounded, her father was taken, not by force, no. He rose at once, kissed her brow, and walked out the door, into the mist, as if pulled by an invisible thread. Others did the same. 5 villagers in total, none ever returned. No bodies were found, no signs. Just that low sonorous thump that cracked the sky open. Since then, Malin has waited. She tells the children stories in exchange for food, tales of the drum, the cave, and the 5 that vanished. But she always ends with the same warning. If you hear it, Stay inside, shut your ears and tie your shadow to something heavy. The drum does not call politely. It does not ask for volunteers. It chooses. The children laugh, but their parents do not. Now, as the mist rolls in thicker than usual, and the moon disappears behind a shroud of silver cloud, something stirs. It begins with the animals. First, the goats refuse to come in from the field. Then the dogs hide beneath porches, their ears flattened and eyes wide. The horses in the stable pace, then stop, heads low, their breath steaming in the chill. And far below, in the cave no one dares to map. Something shifts, a breath, a tremor, a memory. In the village tavern, a group of young men are gathered. They've heard the legends, but they don't believe them. One of them, Jeren, is bolder, or perhaps more foolish than the rest. They say the drum calls to those with old blood. He grins, lifting a mug. I say it's all stories, ghost tales to keep children from wandering. But when the tavern door swings open by itself, despite the still air, and the fire sputters low without wind, the laughter dies. One by one, they step outside. The village is cloaked in a silence so dense it feels like wool stuffed in the ears. Not even the leaves rustle, and then boom. It is not loud, not at first. It is felt more than heard, like someone striking the bottom of the world with an oaken fist. The mug in Jeren's hand falls, unnoticed. He does not remember walking, only the feeling of being drawn like a metal chip pulled toward a hidden magnet, toward the gorge, toward the ash tree, toward the cave, and he is not alone. From other houses, others emerge. A woman in her nightgown, a man still wearing his smithing apron, a girl no older than 10, all walking, silent, their faces blank, their eyes distant. They converge like streams, winding toward the same place. Malin stands in her doorway, leaning on her cane. Her voice breaks the silence, hoarse but steady. Don't go, not again, not again. But they pass her, as if she were air. The drum has called, and those chosen must answer. Inside the cave, the air is warm, not unpleasantly so, but as if the stone walls have soaked in sunlight they never saw, and now breathe it out in slow pulses. The runes carved into the cave flicker faintly, glowing a shade between amber and ember. The drum stands as it always has, but something has changed. This time, it is cracked. A small line no longer than a fingernail, spiders from its top edge downward, fresh, sharp, and humming softly, like a tuning fork set vibrating. Jeren is the first to enter, his feet carry him with no hesitation. Behind him, the others line up, eyes fixed on the drum. One by one, they touch it, and vanish. Not in a flash of light, not in a roar of sound, simply gone, like a breath exhaled into the night. Outside, Malin falls to her knees. This time, she knows what it means. The crack in the drum was not there before, and the drum never cracks, unless it is near the end of its work. She remembers a line from a story told to her by her grandmother, long buried beneath the hawthorn tree. When the drum cracks, so too will the seal, and what was bound shall wake, but bound by what, by who, and what is it that waits beneath the stone and root, patient as a buried king, silent for centuries? The stories have no answer, only fragments, myths of a pact made before time was counted, of a being, not god, not beast, not ghost, who offered power in exchange for memory, safety, for sacrifice. And every century, a toll is paid, a sound is struck, and 5 are taken, until the seal weakens, until the crack widens, until the bargain breaks. That night, the drum sounds once more, not once, but twice. A second strike, and the sky weeps stars. The mist never lifts from Vale Hollows again. Years pass, decades. Travelers who stumble upon the gorge report strange phenomena. Time seems to slow, or loop. Their dreams are filled with a steady, distant thumping. Some claim to hear voices, others lose hours. A few never return. The ash tree remains, so does the cave. But the drum is gone. Only the crack remains, etched now into the earth itself, a fissure that glows faintly when the moon is high. And far beneath, in darkness, thick as oil, something breathes, slowly, waiting for the next strike. The pillars that vanish in storms. In the far reaches of a wind-battered coastline, where the cliffs fall away like broken teeth into the endless grey of the sea, there is a place that refuses to stay still. It is not marked on maps, and even the locals speak of it, only when the sky grows heavy with rain and the gulls fly low. It is there, beyond a crumbling path of shale and wet moss, that the pillars wait, ancient, jagged structures of impossible size and forgotten origin. But only when the storms roll in, when the sky darkens with thunder and salt spray curls like smoke, the pillars appear. No one can say how many. Some claim there are 7, others swear to 11, standing in strange formations on the tidal flats, geometric, alien, and cold, smooth as glass but carved with runes that seem to flicker just out of the corner of the eye. And when the sun returns, or the mist clears, they are simply gone, as if they were never there at all. The first recorded sighting is etched in a faded journal, found in the attic of a lighthouse keeper's abandoned quarters, dated 1843. The author, a man named Gideon Thorne, wrote in careful slanted hand about black monoliths taller than any mast, that sang like iron bowls as the wind screamed around them. He was not believed, of course, not then, not even later, when he vanished during a particularly violent storm and his journal was found sealed in wax beneath his floorboards. But Gideon was not the last. Since then, scattered across the decades, others have spoken of the pillars, fishermen, travelers, drifters, always during a storm, always with wide eyes and trembling fingers. Their accounts match in uncanny detail, though none knew the others, and always, the stories end the same way, with a warning not to go near. No one listens. It is human nature, perhaps, to be drawn to the forbidden, the impossible, and so, year after year, wanderers follow the whispers. Some return, most do not. The ones who come back are not quite the same. They speak of how time feels thicker near the pillars, as though every second is stretched on a rack, of how sound disappears, not muted, but devoured. They describe standing before them, rain slashing sideways through the mist, and hearing a deep subsonic tone humming through their bones, a note that resonates with something old inside them. Some claim the pillars shift when you're not looking, that they are closer each time you blink, that the runes pulse faintly, glowing in patterns that seem to mimic thoughts you haven't had yet. There is one story, rarely shared, only whispered in the backs of dim pubs by those who've drunk enough to quiet their fear. It tells of a boy who followed the storm out to the tidal flat, where the stones rise. He stood between them and touched one, only one, and when the lightning struck, it struck not from sky to earth, but from pillar to boy. He did not die, he simply froze, and though the others ran to him, screaming, they found he could not speak or move. His eyes were wide, still blinking, still breathing, but motionless, unblinking otherwise, like a figure carved from wax. They carried him back to the village, and he remained that way for weeks. Then, one morning, he was gone, no trace, his bed unslept in, window unlatched, a single wet footprint on the sill. No one saw him again, but 3 weeks later, during another storm, someone swore they saw his shape, just for a moment, standing between the pillars, watching. Some believe the stones are sentinels, watching the sea for something older than memory. Others think they are a warning left behind by something long gone, a reminder not to pry too deep, not to build too close. And some, the ones who've stood in their shadow, believe the pillars are a door, a test, that when the lightning splits the clouds just right, and the tide pulls back far enough, and the wind carries the exact right note, that's when the door opens, and something chooses whether to let you pass. The village nearest the cliffs, little more than a scattering of slate-roofed cottages and an inn, has lived with the pillars' presence for centuries, or rather their absence. For most of the year, the place is empty. Only during the season of storms do a few locals return, drawn by some deep obligation, as if pulled by unseen strings. They tend to the graves, sweep the chapel steps, hang iron bells from their doors. It's not clear whether they do this to appease the pillars or to keep them away. No one will say. Not directly. There is a story about one such villager, an old woman named Mara. She never left. The last living soul of a village otherwise given to wind and rot. Mara spoke little, but every evening she would sit in her window and stare out toward the sea. Her house was filled with notebooks, hundreds of them, written in small looping script, drawings, symbols, the same shapes over and over, tall black towers with cracks of light running through them, circles within circles, lines that folded in on themselves. She died one night during the worst storm in 50 years. Her body was found dry, untouched by water, in her chair, eyes wide open, no signs of pain, clutched in her hands, one final notebook, empty, save for a single page, scrawled in deep red ink. It is open now, That night, several villagers claimed to see something rise beyond the cliffs. Not lightning, not fog, something standing, too symmetrical, too silent. And the next day, when the clouds broke, the sea was calm. No pillars, no sign of the storm. Only the low, rhythmic tolling of a bell that no one could find. Scholars have tried to make sense of it. Some suggest the pillars are natural formations, shaped by erosion and illusion. Others think they are relics from an ancient culture, hidden by a trick of light. But none have stayed long enough to prove it. Their instruments fail. Compasses spin wildly, recordings become static, and those who try to photograph the pillars find only empty sea and mist. A curious thing, despite their size, despite the frequency of the storms, the pillars never seem to leave footprints on the wet sand. No debris, no scarring of the land. It's as if they are made of shadow, of suggestion, called into being by some alignment of memory, fear, and storm. And once gone, only those who have seen them remember. There is an old legend, older than any written record, passed from the mouth of one sailor to another. When the world forgets what came before, the sea will rise and bring back its stones. It is said the pillars are not the first warning, only the last. That in times long before maps, when the sky spun differently and people carved truth into rock, the pillars stood permanently, guiding, guarding, and that something made them vanish, not by choice, but by force. And now they return only briefly, during the storm, waiting. But for what? Some say they are gathering memory, that with each witness, with each story told, they grow more solid, that one day they will stay, and when they do, the door will not close again. It is best not to search for them, to let the sea keep its secrets. But if you find yourself walking the cliffs during a thunderstorm, and you see shapes rising in the mist, tall, unmoving, too precise to be stone, do not draw close. Do not follow the sound. Do not look away. Turn back. Because the pillars only vanish when no one is watching, and some doors once opened, never forget the hand that turned the key. The arch that whispers the day you'll vanish. There are places in the world that don't appear on maps, places that slip through the cracks in geography, where compasses spiral and time walks with a limp. This story begins in such a place, a forgotten stretch of land deep in the highlands, where mist clings to the ridges and old shepherds speak in hushed tones, as if the hills themselves are listening. The locals call it the hollow spine, not because of any bones or fossils, but because of the way the wind moves through the stone there. It moans in strange patterns, like breath through a flute. Some say the land sings its own lullaby to itself, trying not to remember what was buried beneath. In this place, carved into a crooked ridge, and partially buried in earth the color of rust, stands an arch. Not grand, not ornamental, just an arch of pale stone too smooth to be natural, too forgotten to be modern. No path leads to it. No sign explains it. It simply exists, rising from the ground like a thought someone tried to forget but couldn't. Travelers don't come here on purpose. They stumble into it, sometimes after getting lost on a hike, sometimes chasing a story told in a pub too late at night. But those who do find it rarely talk about it afterward. You might wonder why a simple arch, barely tall enough to walk under, might frighten grown men and leave experienced wanderers unsettled. Because the arch whispers. But not in the way you might expect, not constantly, not to everyone. It only speaks once, and what it says, what it chooses to tell you is always the same. The day you'll vanish. It doesn't predict your death. It doesn't describe a fate or warn you of misfortune. It names a date. Nothing more. And when that date arrives, no one who's heard it has been seen again, not missing persons, not remains. Nothing. The arch does not lie, they say. A historian from Prague once spent 3 weeks camping near the arch, trying to document its origin. He never heard it speak. But on the 22nd night, he packed his gear, left his notes behind, and walked into the fog. His bag was found at the base of the ridge, but no one ever found him. A teenage girl, running away from home, supposedly found it by accident. She later told a hostel worker she'd heard a voice say, March 3rd. She laughed it off at the time, until the date came. Her parents received a postcard a week after blank, except for the date and a small sketch of the arch. Some say the arch isn't ancient, that it wasn't there until recently. But that's not quite true. A shepherd's journal from 1849 mentions a gate of bone-white stone that spoke to the wind. A traveller in 1911 described an arch, not carved by human hands, which hummed low like a throat about to speak. In each case, those who lingered near it long enough heard their date. Sometimes the date was years away, sometimes just days. It didn't matter. No one escapes it. The most curious thing, though, is that the whisper doesn't come from above or around you. People say it enters your chest, like a breath you didn't take. It resonates inside you, bypassing your ears altogether. And it's never wrong. But here's where the story folds in on itself. What happens if you don't hear it? What if you stand under the arch, stare through it, walk back and forth for hours, and it stays silent? Does that mean you're safe, that you're outside its reach, or does that mean it doesn't need to tell you? Some believe silence is worse, that if it whispers, it acknowledges you. But if it doesn't, maybe it already has you. No one knows where the voice comes from. It doesn't match any language, yet every listener understands it. Some feel it as a chill, others as a warmth, like a final embrace, but the effect is always the same. The moment you hear your date, a kind of clock starts ticking. Not loud, not intrusive, but persistent, subtle. It follows you, sleeps beside you. Every moment afterward is a countdown. There's no pattern to the dates, no logic. An old woman once heard November 29th and passed peacefully in her sleep that day, despite being in perfect health. A soldier heard April 1st and vanished on a calm morning in a suburban park. No enemies around, no sign of violence. Even skeptics fear it. A journalist once mocked the legend in an article titled "Whispers from a Rock." She disappeared the week after her piece was published. Her editor received a voicemail, just the sound of wind and a faint, single word, her date. The police couldn't trace the call. Now there are those who have tried to study it scientifically, acoustic engineers, paranormal investigators. Each one stayed only a few days. Equipment fails near the ridge. Batteries drain. Audio becomes corrupted, and one by one the researchers stopped returning calls. Their last notes always mention the arch and the exact moment it spoke. But perhaps the most haunting tale is this. In 1993, a boy named Thomas drew a picture in school of a white arch standing in a field of fog. When his teacher asked about it, he said, "It talks to you." No one in his family had ever heard of the place. No one had been there. Years later, when he was 21, Thomas vanished while on a hiking trip. His journal, left behind in a waterproof pouch, contained only one entry. It told me, October 12th. I think I've always known. No one knows how he found it. Some locals believe the arch is not a relic, but a sentinel, that it watches, not with eyes, but with intent, that it only speaks when necessary, and never for fun. Others say it's a remnant of something older, a fracture between this world and another, and the whisper is not a warning, but a promise, that when your day comes you do not die, but return, to where no one knows. But there's one more thing. A story never written down. It's passed verbally between the oldest inhabitants of the region. It's about a man who heard the date and survived it. They say he buried himself underground that day, locked himself in steel, starved for a week. When he emerged alive and trembling, he believed he'd cheated fate, but the next morning he was gone. Only his boots remained. Some say the arch whispered again to him in the moment before he vanished. Not a date this time, just a single word, late, and now. Now the arch still stands, quiet, waiting. It doesn't speak often. Sometimes it waits for years between whispers. But if you ever find yourself on a foggy ridge in the highlands, and you see a pale arch rising from the earth like a forgotten thought, ask yourself this: would you walk beneath it? Would you want to know? And if it whispered to you, would you tell anyone? Or would you simply wait, watching the days slip past like shadows on the ground, listening for a second whisper that never comes? Because once you hear the date, you'll never hear silence the same way again. The mountain with a door at its peak. They say that if you climb high enough into the folds of the Dargan Range, where the wind slices sideways and clouds roll like waves over jagged peaks, you'll come to a place where the mountain stops pretending to be part of the earth, where it starts to become something else. It doesn't appear on maps anymore, old ones perhaps, the kind you find folded in half and crumbling behind glass in dusty mountain museums. Those old surveyor's charts with smudged lines and faded ink sometimes show an unmarked elevation near the summit of Mount Selwyn, not quite a peak and not quite a pass, where all recorded expeditions mysteriously stop short, just blank, a curve that leads nowhere. But locals, those few who still live in the shadow of the Dargan Range, call it God's Knuckle, not out of reverence, out of fear. They tell stories when the fires burn low and the mountain winds are howling. of a place high above where the rock groans like timber, of a ridge that hums beneath your feet, and of a door set into the peak itself, tall, narrow, and sealed tight with no hinges. No one ever sees it open, but some say it doesn't have to. One early morning in late autumn, a man named Riven Thorn set out to find it. He wasn't a mountaineer by trade, he wasn't an archaeologist or a treasure hunter, or even particularly adventurous. He was a linguist, a quiet man with soft eyes and a habit of scribbling thoughts into leather-bound notebooks. But he had inherited a collection of ancient journals from his grandfather, scrapbooks and diagrams and inked letters written in the margins. Obsessions, really. One particular phrase kept showing up in the writings, in Old Darganic script, and even in phonetic Hebrew and early Latin. The mountain sings before it opens. Riven never understood it, until he found a half-burned sketch beneath the false bottom of one journal, a drawing of a stone slope carved like a cathedral arch. With it, a note: "Do not knock, do not speak, do not face it when it sings." No coordinates, just a compass direction, and a few cryptic elevation markings, enough to tempt a man who had spent his entire life reading other people's mysteries. So Riven packed warm gear, enough food for 2 weeks, and a handheld field recorder with a high-sensitivity microphone. He told no one, not even his sister, who would have told him the same thing she always did. Some places don't want to be found. He began his trek just before the snows were expected, at the narrow base trail where moss clings thick to the rocks and you can still smell pine in the air. As he ascended, the forest thinned, pines gave way to scraggy brush, then stone, then silence. By the 4th day, he was beyond the regular climbing routes. No red markers, no crevasse ropes, just frost-bitten wind, and a sky that stayed grey no matter the hour. And then he heard it, just past dusk when the world had gone blue and his breath fogged around his head. He stopped to check his bearings and felt it, a soft vibration in the soles of his boots, like standing near the belly of a great machine, and over that, a faint rhythmic tone, distant, hollow, almost organic, not like wind, but something deeper, slower. He turned on the recorder, the red light blinked, the tone continued, a tremor passed beneath his feet, and then silence. He continued upward, adrenaline replacing fatigue. By the 6th day he came upon it. At first it looked like a natural outcropping, just another slab of dark granite amid a craggy ridge. But when he circled it, the angles betrayed it. Too perfect, too vertical. A rectangle set flush into the rock face, 15 feet tall, 7 feet wide, framed by a raised seam no thicker than a coin. There was no handle, no hinge, no markings, only smooth, icy stone and that same low humming beneath his feet. He set up camp a few meters away. He didn't sleep. Instead, he watched, listened, recorded. On the 2nd night, just past midnight, the humming returned, louder this time, rhythmic, like breath through a stone lung. The door did not open, but the temperature around it plummeted. He approached, slowly, his recorder in one hand, the other grazing the icy stone, and as he laid his palm against the center of the door, it was warm. Not just warm, pulsing. He snatched his hand back. The recorder hissed. Then silence. That night, he dreamed he was standing inside a vast, dark hall lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not himself but versions of others, wearing different clothes, bearing strange scars, with eyes too old to be his own. When he woke, his boots were wet, as if he had walked. The next morning, he found something new, footprints, not his own, not animal, bare, human, leading away from the door, and then disappearing after 10 paces into the snow. He followed them anyway. They led him to a ridge overhang with a sheer drop into fog. No signs of passage, no rope, no ladder, but carved into the stone at the edge, in the same archaic script as his grandfather's notes, were words etched barely deep enough to see. It opens for those who don't look back. He didn't jump, but he didn't forget. Over the next 3 days, the weather worsened. Snow turned to sleet. Winds shrieked down the pass like a warning. Riven kept recording, kept writing, kept listening. On the 12th night, something changed. The mountain went still. No wind, no sound, no hum, and then 3 sharp knocks, not from his camp, from the door. He turned, heart hammering, stepped closer, recorder on. Nothing. Then a whisper, faint, impossible, from the stone itself. A single word in a language he did not know, and yet understood. Enter. And with that the seam along the door's edge, lit with faint blue veins, like lightning trapped beneath the surface. The door receded, not opened, not swung, but slid backward, into the mountain, a perfect silent motion. Inside, darkness, total and complete. Yet something compelled him. Riven stepped inside. The door slid shut behind him. What lay beyond defied explanation. And though the winds clawed at their cloaks and the cold sank deeper into their joints, they pressed on. By now, all signs of the lower world were gone. No bird calls, no distant rivers, no insects buzzing, only wind, only stone, only silence. Eleanor paused to catch her breath, resting a hand on the curved rock wall that loomed beside her like the flank of some sleeping beast. It felt warmer than it should. Not warm like life, but not the dead chill of high-altitude stone either. And then she noticed the carvings. They weren't obvious. Time and snow had worn them almost smooth, and they seemed etched only by shadow at first, subtle depressions and curves that made no sense when looked at directly, but shifted into vague suggestion in the corner of the eye. Spirals. Eyes. Doors within doors. Raffi saw her staring. "Are they maps?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't think they're meant to be understood like that. It's a warning," said Thomas quietly. "Just like the ones below, just more hidden." But they climbed on, circling toward the summit as the sun began to descend behind the far peaks. Shadows stretched long and strange across the snow. Their footsteps were the only sound, until Raffi stopped short and whispered, "Listen." They listened. At first there was nothing, then a hum. Distant, almost subterranean, like a bell struck deep inside the mountain. It didn't repeat. Thomas unslung his pack. "We camp here," he said. "That sound, if it was real, we wait and see." That night, the cold felt wrong, not just sharp, but invasive. It wormed through their clothes, into their dreams. Eleanor dreamed of faces watching her through cracks in the sky. Thomas dreamed of opening doors he didn't remember closing. Raffi dreamed of sinking into stone that breathed like flesh. They didn't speak of it the next morning, but none of them asked to turn back. The final stretch to the summit was a staircase. It shouldn't have been there. The rock turned to steps, weathered, uneven, but deliberate, each one shallow, wide, and just slightly too long to be comfortable for human legs. As they climbed, the wind stopped. The silence returned, deeper than before. It pressed against their ears, as though the world held its breath. Then they reached it, the door. It was set into the mountain's peak itself, an arched opening about twice the height of a person, carved into the black stone like it had always been there. No hinges, no handle, just a solid slab with a faint line down the middle, like two panels meant to open inward. Around it were more of those carvings, interlocking circles, downward-pointing arrows, and the image of an eye with a star at its center. Eleanor reached out and touched the surface. Warm again, not heated by sun, just not cold. Her hand tingled. "Does it open?" Raffi asked. "No latch," said Thomas. "Maybe it's ceremonial," but as if in answer, the hum returned, louder, and the door split down the center. It didn't groan. It didn't resist. It opened silently, revealing nothing but thick darkness inside. Eleanor stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the wind resumed, howling suddenly, chaotically, as if the mountain exhaled in shock. Then it stopped again. She was gone. "Ellie?" Thomas shouted. "Eleanor." Raffi leapt after her without hesitation. Thomas swore and followed. Inside was not darkness. It was not anything they had expected. The air was warm, damp, smelling faintly of moss and candle wax. They were in a corridor of smooth stone, not rough like the mountain, but carved and polished, with walls that gleamed faintly gold. Light came from no source they could see. It just was. Eleanor stood just ahead, her hand raised as if to touch the light itself. "This isn't rock," she whispered. "No, it's older," said Thomas. The corridor sloped downward, always downward. They walked in silence for minutes or hours. Time lost meaning. Their thoughts wandered. Raffi saw murals on the walls where there were none. Eleanor heard the echo of her name in the stone. Thomas kept seeing doors in the corners of his vision, always just out of reach. Then they reached the chamber. It opened like a heart, vast and circular, lined with pillars that reached up into darkness. At the center stood a statue. No, a figure, or both. It was shaped like a robed person, but its face was missing. Not blank, missing. A hole where the face should be, black and infinite, yet somehow shifting, and the robes were carved with masks, hundreds of them, each different, each with a unique expression: joy, sorrow, rage, peace, madness, and slowly, they began to change. One by one, the masks shifted. A smile turned to a sneer, a calm gaze warped into weeping, a snarl melted into laughter, and the hum was back, constant now, a vibration through their bones. "Eleanor," Thomas said softly, "we should leave." But Eleanor had stepped closer. Her eyes were fixed on the faceless figure. "It's not a statue," she said. "It's watching us." The masks began changing faster. Raffi stumbled back. "This place is wrong. We shouldn't be here." Then the door behind them slammed shut, and the air turned. It was no longer warm, no longer calm. A wind rose from beneath, a wind that smelled of time and dust, and memories that didn't belong to them. The masks stopped changing. They had all turned outward, and for a heartbeat, they all shared the same expression: recognition. He took one final step, and the door opened. Not with a sound, but with a feeling. As though the air changed density, the moment thickened, the edge of reality curled, and he was no longer outside the door but inside it. There was no threshold, no frame, just a change in pressure, and then he was within the mountain. The inside was not a cave. It was smoother than anything carved by human hands. The walls had no edges, only flowing curved surfaces like the inside of a shell. Lights glowed faintly, not from torches or fixtures, but from the stone itself, soft blues, silvers, and the occasional pulse of gold, as if the mountain were breathing. And within this glowing tunnel, the boy could hear it clearly now, voices. Not speaking in any language he'd ever known, yet he understood them. Not because he heard words, but because he felt meaning. The voices told him that the mountain was once a place of passage, a gate between waking and dreaming, between flesh and memory, a meeting place for those who had forgotten their names but remembered their purpose. He followed the corridor downward, though it felt like walking into the sky. He passed alcoves that showed moments, not sculptures, not paintings, but living memories suspended in liquid air. One showed a woman building a bridge of glass across a desert storm. Another showed a child whispering to a tree that grew into a tower overnight, and then he reached the heart. A single chamber, vast and silent, with a sphere of black water levitating at its center. No ripples, no reflection, a perfect stillness. The voices quieted. The mountain seemed to wait. He reached out and touched the surface of the sphere. Suddenly, he was not standing anymore. He was falling sideways into someone else's life. A field of grass. An old man digging a hole with his bare hands, muttering an apology. A city of mirrors with no people. A sun that blinked once, and never again. An army made of sand crumbling as they walked. A creature weeping because no one had yet dreamed it. He saw not one story, but thousands. And he understood, this was not a place of secrets, but of safekeeping. A vault of possible worlds. A shelter for forgotten futures. A memory bank of realities that never quite arrived. And someone or something had been waiting for him to see it. The mountain had chosen him, not because he was special, but because he had wandered. Because he had dared to climb without asking why. And in doing so, he had become the door. He opened his eyes and found himself not in the chamber, not in the corridor, but back on the mountainside, facing the stone door. The air was still, the sky unchanged, the path behind him silent. But when he looked down, he noticed something strange. He was no longer leaving footprints. And then in the distance, he saw another figure, a traveler, young, unsure, ascending the slope toward the peak. The boy, no, not a boy anymore, smiled. He stepped aside, and the door began to open again. The pool that reflects a forgotten war. There is a place, tucked quietly into the folds of a forgotten valley, where the trees bend ever so slightly toward one another, and the light filters through in faded gold. It is not marked on any map, nor spoken of aloud in the villages that sit at the edge of memory. Travelers who come close tend to turn around before they realize why, before they even sense that something waits there, just out of reach. They say it was once the site of a terrible war, though no one recalls what nations fought it, or what sparked the bloodshed. The details have been swallowed by time, but something of it remains, not the banners or the bones, not the smoke or the sound, but the water. A pool that rests in the center of the forest, round and still, cupped in earth as though the land itself grew weary and wept a single tear. It is not large, no more than 20 feet across, a basin edged with soft moss and stones worn smooth by seasons. Yet the surface of this pool reflects more than what stands above it. Those who look into it say they see something else. Not their faces, not the branches overhead, but scenes they don't remember living. Marches through snowy fields, smoke curling from villages, half gone, faces lined with grief, and hands clutching letters that never arrived. It began, perhaps, with the soldiers. The old paths that lead to the pool are almost invisible now, overtaken by bramble and leaf. But centuries ago, boots trod those trails. Some say a division of men camped near the pool during an unnamed campaign. They were running low on supplies, lost in the forest, waiting on orders that never came. And as the days stretched on and the silence deepened, something in the water called to them. At first they used it for drinking. It was clearer than any stream they'd crossed. Always cool, never freezing. But before long, one of the men, an officer, it said, stared into the surface too long. He claimed to see a battlefield, one that hadn't happened yet. Fire, screaming, uniforms torn. When he looked away, he was changed, quiet, distant, and the next morning he vanished. One by one, the rest followed. Some claimed visions in the water, others walked into the trees and never returned. By the time a scouting party arrived weeks later, all that remained was a camp of rotting canvas, boot prints leading toward the pool, and silence. No struggle, no sign of battle, just absence. From that day forward, the pool earned names whispered rather than written. The mirror of the lost, the pool of echoes, the water that watches back. Locals tried to avoid it, though some couldn't help themselves. Hunters, wanderers. A curious child once followed a fox into the woods, and was found 2 days later, sitting at the edge of the pool, silent and unmoving. His eyes were open, but he would not speak for the rest of his life. There was a scholar too, an archivist from a distant city, who came seeking the source of the war that time forgot. She pored over records, maps that had been redacted, names blotted out, regiments listed as missing with no explanation. Her search led her to the valley, where she camped for weeks, taking notes, sketching the trees, marking the stones, and then she found the pool. She wrote in her journal that first evening, "There is a stillness here that does not belong to the natural world. The birds go quiet when I approach it. Even the wind changes. I cannot explain why, but I feel as though I've stepped into someone else's memory." Her entries grew stranger over time. The reflections are wrong. I saw soldiers in the pool today. Not modern ones. Ancient, mud-soaked, gaunt. One looked up at me and mouthed something I could not hear. Later, I had a dream last night that I drowned in the pool, but my lungs filled with smoke, not water. I woke with soot on my hands. Her final entry, "I understand now. The pool doesn't show the past, it shows the wound left by the war. A place, a feeling, an echo that time cannot erase. It is not a memory. It is a scar." She was never seen again. Her journal was found beneath a birch tree, open to a page where a charcoal drawing of the pool had been smudged nearly clean by rain. There are those who believe the pool is alive in some way. Not conscious, exactly, but reactive, reflective, in the truest sense, that it shows you what was left unresolved. The war, yes, but also the fears, the choices, the threads unpulled from the lives it touched. A farmer who once stumbled upon the pool on a foggy morning swore that he saw his grandfather there, not as the gentle man who raised him, but as a soldier in blood-streaked rags, eyes hollow, whispering things he could not hear. He ran, and never returned to that part of the woods again. There is no record of the war itself, no monument, no national archives that name the field, the reason, the loss. It is as if the conflict was wiped clean but the pool remembers, as though it gathered the echoes into itself and held them there, still playing, over and over beneath the surface. Some believe it was never a war between nations, but between ideas, between guilt and duty, between remembrance and silence. And in the quietest part of night, they say, when the wind slips low through the forest and the trees stop rustling, the pool glows faintly blue. And if you dare look into it, then truly look, what you see may not be a vision of the past, but something waiting to be resolved, something that needs to be witnessed, understood, not for its horror, but for the ache it left behind, because sometimes what a war leaves behind is not ruin, but forgetting, and in the center of the forgotten forest, the pool waits, unchanged, unclaimed. The moss grows thicker each year, softening the stones, the trees creep closer, inch by inch, yet nothing touches the water, no leaves fall upon it, no frost dares to form, it remains exactly as it was, exactly as it remembers. They say if you sit there long enough, still, and open and quiet, you might begin to hear the voices, not loud, not angry, just low, tired, overlapping like waves, a woman calling a name, a man reciting numbers, a child singing a song that doesn't have an ending, all in languages you almost understand. And when you stand to leave, if you've listened well, you'll carry a piece of it with you, not a burden, not a curse, just a thread of understanding, a silent promise to remember what was never recorded, to see what others chose not to. You'll look into lakes and wonder what stories lie beneath. You'll hear the silence between footsteps and think of the soldiers who never returned. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way back one day, not because you were summoned, but because some stories ask to be witnessed, and the pool that reflects a forgotten war, will be waiting, still, watching, remembering, for those who no longer can. The Garden of Petrified Footsteps. It begins in a place without sound, where wind drifts low and carries nothing but the hush of long-forgotten breath. You would not find it on any ordinary map, but if you followed the broken ridges beyond the salt plains where the earth cracks open like a dried tongue, and walked until the sky itself seemed to fold inward, you might come to the edge of a hollow basin where no birds fly and no insects hum, a place out of step with time. There, nestled in the bowl of the land, like something once buried and then unearthed too soon, lies the Garden of Petrified Footsteps. The name is not metaphorical. The ground is stone, yes, but not in the way of cliffs or mountains. The stone here is smooth in some places, weathered in others, yet scattered across it, some shallow, some deep, are impressions unmistakable as footprints. Some are barefoot, some appear to be sandal-clad, a few bear the faint pattern of long-decayed soles, but they are too numerous, too deliberate in their winding paths, and they all lead in strange intersecting circles. People once walked here, or something did, that much is certain, but what's strange is that no two prints are exactly the same. Each one is preserved with uncanny detail, creases in the heel, the soft dip of an arch, the suggestion of movement forever frozen in the act of stepping. Some lead toward each other, some away. A few stop suddenly, mid-step, as if the person simply vanished into air. The stone itself is not local. Geologists who've been allowed to examine samples describe it as having properties closer to volcanic glass, though there's no volcano within hundreds of miles. Others say it's not glass at all, but some form of pressure-melted bedrock reshaped by forces unknown. A few claim it reacts strangely to water, becoming faintly luminescent under rain. The legend, if you ask those who live on the edges of the basin, is older than any story they were taught to tell. Elders from the nearby scattered communities say that long ago, before even the first roads were laid, the place was already old. Travelers passed by and spoke of the ghost steps. Some claimed they heard singing from the basin on windless nights. Others said the footprints changed when no one was watching. There was one story, retold in hushed tones around fires, about a man who tried to map the footsteps. He brought chalk and string and a compass, determined to untangle what he believed was a vast code. He returned to town raving, eyes bloodshot, palms blistered. He claimed that the steps told a story, but not one humans were meant to read. Before he vanished, he scrawled one phrase into the dirt outside his tent. They walked towards something not built by hands. No one knows what became of him, but years later, a team of university researchers stumbled across his notes in a forgotten archive that renewed interest in the garden. Briefly, funding was allocated. A mobile lab was brought in, but after 3 weeks the entire project was quietly shut down. No explanation was ever given. The official statement cited inconclusive data and logistical difficulty, yet members of the crew left strange remarks in their resignation letters. One mentioned prolonged auditory phenomena, another noted an uneasy sense of mirroring, a third claimed to have followed a line of footprints, only to find her own boot prints facing her, though she swore she'd never been there before. Satellite images reveal something even stranger. The garden seems to shift slightly in size each year. It's subtle, just a few meters change, but consistent, as if the stone itself is expanding, slowly erasing the desert around it. And then there are the statues. They don't appear at first. You have to enter the basin and follow the prints. After the first hour of walking in the midday sun, you'll notice strange shapes rising from the stone. They're worn smooth, wind-scoured, eroded into abstract forms. At first glance, they seem like oddly shaped rocks, but look closer, and you'll see the unmistakable curves of shoulders, the arch of a back, the sweep of fabric carved into mineral. They're people, or they were, dozens of them, frozen mid-stride, some standing, some crouching. One appears to be reaching skyward, mouth open in a silent shout. None are intact. Time has chipped at them. Wind has scoured their faces, but the humanity in their poses remains, haunting and unmistakable. No one knows who made them. There are no chisel marks, no signs of construction, and perhaps most eerie of all, their feet align perfectly with the fossilized footprints, as if they were sculpted to match, as if they grew from the prints themselves. There's one statue at the far end of the basin that stands apart, taller than the rest, less eroded. It appears to wear a hooded cloak, though that may be the shape time left behind. Its face is the least worn of all, yet somehow, no two photographs of it look the same. Some say the eyes are open in one, closed in another. Others swear the lips are parted in a whisper that changes direction. Those who spend the night nearby report vivid dreams of walking, always walking, through halls not made of stone but of sound, corridors of whispers and footsteps. Some say they dream of following someone in the dark, only to realize too late that the footsteps ahead of them are their own. Others wake with their shoes misplaced, or facing the wrong direction. One researcher awoke to find a perfectly preserved footprint beside her cot, barefoot, pressed into the stone floor of the lab itself. She left that morning, and never returned. There are theories, of course. One suggests a prehistoric volcanic event flash fossilized a migrating group of early humans. Another claims the entire basin is a hoax, an elaborate art installation created decades ago and buried for effect. A more fringe theory links the basin to ancient atmospheric anomalies, something akin to ball lightning, but on a geological scale. But none of these explain the feeling. Everyone who visits the Garden of Petrified Footsteps speaks of a sensation they can't quite articulate. Not fear, exactly. Not awe, either. More like the sense that they are walking through a memory that is not their own, that something is being reenacted, over and over, but the script is incomplete. A few have likened it to walking in a cathedral built by silence, where every step echoes with questions, and still, new footprints appear. That is the newest mystery. Footprints not found on earlier surveys, some with odd spacing, or unusual depth. One series of prints discovered last year led in a perfect spiral, before vanishing into smooth stone. No entrance, no exit. Motion sensors placed near the spiral picked up nothing. No animals, no seismic shifts, just the slow creep of wind and time. And yet, every few years, another pair of prints appears, perfectly preserved, as if the stone remembers, as if the garden is not merely a place, but a process. Some say it's growing, and perhaps it is, but toward what, no one can say.